And getting this all up and ready here. Yeah, man. All right. So, welcome everybody to another episode on our education class at Xeno Mining. I am your host, the Mac Composer. Today we're going to talk about Bitcoin. Last week we talked about Nervos, and before then we talked about stuff like mining infrastructure, immersion mining, and mining basics, and all this kind of stuff. So if you want to get into learning more about that, we have pre-recorded lessons here that I do every week. It's all in the investors section where you can find the tutorials thread. Okay, that is where you have access to all of this stuff that I procure for you guys. Little background for me. I'm a college professor at two universities. I teach at the City College in New York, and I teach at SAE Institute of Technology in New York City as well. And, mining crypto and Web3 is a big hobby of mine, and I want to do more of this professionally too. So here is my way of contributing back to you guys. One, as a holder, right? I'm a holder of Xeno, and I am also a moderator, of course, and I want to give you guys quality content. So I'm always open with my classrooms to feedback and also, a conversation forum like setting. Please, if you have any questions as I am going through this, feel free to stop me and speak up. I will, periodically I'll ask you if there's any questions, of course, but you could also use the chat if you don't feel like you want to, have your voice heard, but you want to ask your question. Before we get started, actually, is there any questions or thoughts, or what are you expecting to learn today? Let's just kind of go around the table, so to speak. Anybody like to pitch in or volunteer?
Why are some people so fascinated with Bitcoin when there's so much better technology out there?
That's a good question. Bitcoin. Why are people fascinated with Bitcoin? Yeah, well, I think hopefully at the end of the lesson, maybe we all garner a little bit more respect for Bitcoin. It is one of the hardest, one of the hardest protocols to make any changes to, because there's so many people mining it. So credit where credit is due in this case. Yeah. Okay. So let's actually get into it. Okay. So Bitcoin, the big kahuna, as I like to call it, right? What is Bitcoin? All right. Bitcoin operates on a decentralized peer-to-peer network, which means there's no central authority or intermediary controlling the transactions. And hopefully we all know this, right? Bitcoin is the most decentralized, in terms of computational power here on this planet. Participants in the network are called nodes. They maintain a copy of the blockchain, which is a public ledger that records all Bitcoin transactions. I personally, myself, operate a node. I think it's a lot of fun, and I have 3 Apollo BTC miners from FutureBit. That's my personal choice. Great company if you want to start getting into small form factor mining for Bitcoin. Transactions are grouped into blocks, which are added to the blockchain in a sequential order for the Bitcoin blockchain. The blockchain serves as a tamper-resistant and transparent record of all transactions, and miners, we basically validate and confirm transactions by solving complex mathematical problems, which require that significant computational power that is very, very debatable with amongst a lot of people that we see. Oh, proof of work, it consumes so much energy, right? And once a miner solves a problem, they add a new block to the blockchain, including the validated transactions, right? That's at the core of how all of this works. Very, very simply put, Bitcoin is a network, a decentralized network of nodes, and it has a transactional ledger where everybody is sort of, as things are getting added to the blockchain, the miners are validating and approving those transactions. Any questions before I move on? Okay. I would ask that if you don't have any questions, just for the time being, please put yourself on mute and then unmute yourself when you are ready to speak. Transactions on Bitcoin. Oh, so I moved a little bit too fast there. Give me a second. Okay. So Bitcoin transactions involve the transfer of value between Bitcoin addresses, and each Bitcoin address is a unique identifier that consists of a public as well as a private key. Now, the public key, let's just make sure we got ourselves muted, folks. I'm hearing a lot of wind in one of these microphones. Thank you. The public key is visible to everyone. This is a key element about the public ledger. Okay, it has to be visible to everyone. The private key, however, is kept secret and is used to access and sign transactions. Everybody in crypto, right, has this model where you have a public address and a private address. Okay, Bitcoin started that. It uses, however, a UTXO, which means unspent transactional output. Okay, that's the model that Bitcoin created, and it's very, very similar to like a cash system. Okay, so if I'm just, it's basically like me to you, right? Each address represents the person themselves, and Bitcoin is then using this sort of like, okay, here is my cash, I give it to you. Ethereum doesn't operate that way. Ethereum operates more like an account model, where we have a sort of bank account type system. It's sort of like a credit and debit system, okay? That is unlike what Bitcoin does. If you don't have the Bitcoin, it's not going to be able to go through, etc. The best non-technical explanation is this, that cash versus bank account analogy. Now, Bitcoin wallets are software applications that allow users to store and send and receive Bitcoins, and wallets manage private keys necessary for signing transactions. Wallets can be classified as hot wallets, which are always connected to the internet, or cold wallets, which are offline for enhanced security. There's also, of course, hardware wallets as well. Now, Bitcoin is actually kind of unique because there's two different units of measurement, and we have a Bitcoin and then we have Satoshis. You may have heard of this before. Now, Bitcoin is the original cryptocurrency and the name of the decentralized digital currency itself, and it was created by Satoshi Nakamoto. It's an anonymous person or group, we don't really know, but it operates on a decentralized network, right, that we just talked about. And the base unit is called Bitcoin, right? Now, Satoshis, on the other hand, are basically divisions of Bitcoin. Now, it is the smallest indivisible unit, all right? And that is 100 million Satoshis equal 1 Bitcoin. So in many, many cases, when we're talking about Bitcoin itself as a unit is not really the thing that we're worried about in terms of mass adoption. It's really the Satoshi, right? Because Bitcoin in itself, nobody really wants to spend the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is too valuable, right? But minuscule amounts of a Bitcoin for microtransactions is definitely something that people are interested in, right? You've heard of probably something called the Lightning Network, which is attempting to do just that, to make microtransactions available to Bitcoin. Now, let's talk about the tokenomics on Bitcoin for a second, okay? It has a limited supply. There's only 21 million Bitcoins out there on the planet. There will never be any more than that. Right now, I think we're at 98% of total dilution of the entire Bitcoin network, or 95, somewhere around there, maybe even 90, who knows. You'd have to look at CoinMarketCap or something. I don't have that information on hand. But the limited supply of Bitcoin is always going to remain at 21 million. And when it's fully mined, that's it. No more Bitcoin will be coming into existence. Now, the supply issuance about Bitcoins there's introduced through a process called what we call this mining, which is what was introduced to the entire cryptocurrency situation. And so the process gradually decreases over time through a predefined halving event. Okay, every 4 years, the rewards for miners get slashed in half. All right, so as a result, Bitcoin issuance slows down over time until the maximum supply is reached. And the reason for doing this is to give stability to the value of a Bitcoin, right? If we were continuously adding Bitcoins and it was fully then diluted, at that point, there's no incentive to mine it. There's no, incentive maybe to like hold on to it. I mean, it's going to have a balancing act between supply and demand. Bitcoin in the beginning wasn't really high in demand, so more Bitcoin was being made. Then over time, right, it slows down, demand increases, and it sort of regulates its sort of price along the way, right? Which is why a lot of people in theory think about Bitcoin going forever up. Obviously that doesn't happen. It's very volatile. Even the biggest crypto here is still very volatile. So something to consider when looking at other altcoins, right? That if we're already having volatility with Bitcoin, forget it. Altcoin market's going to be crazy. All right, so other parts of the tokenomics, decentralized governance. Okay, Bitcoin's tokenomics are governed by a decentralized network of participants. And this is actually very interesting, okay, because the way how governance works with Bitcoin is somebody has to propose, right, a new idea. We call this a Bitcoin improvement protocol or proposal. And this will be then debated in a public forum. And people who decide that they want that change to happen have to actually install the software of the new proposal into their node. And if nodes, more than 51% of the nodes install that information, then it was passed. If not, it will just continue as it normally was. So much more effort into creating change on Bitcoin. Unlike, really, like Ethereum is one that's just like, hey, the devs just want to do this. Okay, the devs do that. There's not really much of a. I mean, there is some governance on some other protocols, and you'll find that people use their, stake in order to attribute more, power in their governance. But Bitcoin's very unique in that in order to have more power in governments, you literally need to have the hardware and infrastructure to do that. Unlike some other places. Hence, which is why Bitcoin is so freaking tough, okay? So, proof of work. Proof of work is the computational algorithm. We call it a consensus algorithm that solves cryptographic puzzles, validating transactions and securing that network. And that process ensures the integrity and immutability of the blockchain. Okay, that is proof of work. Now, transaction fees may include incentives for miners to prioritize and include transactions in blocks that they would mine. And so transactions fees can vary depending on factors like network congestion and the urgency of the transaction. So miners can earn, more money as they are, mining during a really, really busy day of Bitcoin. Transaction fees are higher, right? It's very similar to how it was, when Ethereum was going crazy. Everybody was, mining Ethereum back then. And they were earning quite a bit of money just mining it because there was so much congestion. But this happens with a miner, focus or a proof of work focused algorithm. Miners are incentivized to uphold and add more computational power in order to help solve the the congestion, the bottlenecking that's happening on the network. Store of value and medium of exchange. So Bitcoin is often seen as a store of value, similar to digital gold, because of its scarcity and decentralized nature. And while it was initially designed as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, it is commonly used as a medium of exchange for various goods and services. This is a very interesting point, I think, because it's not easy being the first to do certain things, right? I think to go back to that point of why do we still use Bitcoin, because there's so much better stuff out there. Well, I think you got to give a little bit of credence that Bitcoin was the first, right? So maybe in that moment when Satoshi made their creation, it wasn't overcomplicating things, right? Bitcoin was very simple. It was just like, can we do the first step, which is to make something a decentralized network where we don't have government institutions meddling in our stuff. Satoshi never intended that Bitcoin was to be, just static. Okay, it wasn't supposed to just remain the way it was. Satoshi knew that as time went on, demand for more data, speed, and scalability, that would all become a thing. But the first important part of that was, let's just create a rock solid system that won't be tampered with. Okay, and we can definitely say that that was a success, even at this point, just 14 years later after Bitcoin was created. So, market demand, let's talk about that, because we're going to also see a lot other things, all the improvements that Bitcoin has made over the course of years, but the value of Bitcoin is driven by that market demand and factors like investor sentiment, adoption, regulatory developments, macroeconomic conditions, etc. And Bitcoin's decentralized nature and its potential as a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty have contributed to its popularity as an investment asset. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people, when they are seeing, double trouble, toils and trouble in this world, they're going to Bitcoin as a way to hedge against what's happening with the banks, right? So the first thing is Bitcoin, right? People don't necessarily think of, oh, Phantom or, oh, Polkadot. That's not the first thing they think of, right? It's Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the first thing. Because Bitcoin is, I like to look at Bitcoin as the leader of the charge, right? It may not be the fastest or the best for Web3 applications and all that stuff yet, but man, it's the freedom fighter. You know what I mean? So it's important to note that Bitcoin's tokenomics and market dynamics are subject to various factors and will evolve over time. Any questions about tokenomics before I move on? Or any thoughts and opinions?
Hey, man, composer. So, is the concern with having hardware and people being able to acquire hardware, being able to take over the governance of the network and make those decisions if they wanted to, say, expand the supply of Bitcoin possible?
I guess anything could be possible if enough people want it. I doubt it, though. I think if we had a massive, overwhelming demand for more Bitcoin to be issued into the network, I'm not sure actually if that could be possible, but maybe. That is something that I need to do a little bit more research on, whether or not we could change the amount of supply. I'm assuming we would, because it's all code. So if everybody were to add that upgrade to their nodes, then we would possibly see that also take place. It's doubtful, in my opinion, though. I think most investors in Bitcoin at this point in time, and the people who have a majority of Bitcoin miners, if they were to increase the supply, that would devalue Bitcoin. And that's not necessarily, maybe, honestly, this might be more of an issue in like 100 years, where we're slowly getting to that point where Bitcoin is going to be fully mined. And if people wanted to continue mining, maybe at that point, that's something that they decide. But I don't think at this point in time would be very, very reasonable.
Well, that was going to kind of lead into my next question. You kind of already said, when it's fully mined, what potential, if miners are not, well, I guess they're not getting mining revenue as far as in Satoshi's, but
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess my question would also be then, once it's fully mined, what would be the incentives besides transactional fees? In what, I guess.
Yeah, no, no, it's a very valid question, and it's something I guess to say we don't necessarily have much of an answer for. Um, I could only assume that the reason for doing a mining sort of system that happens over the course of like 150 years, something like Cadena or Bitcoin will do, this is going to be something like kick the bucket down the road sort of problem. And then I think, depending on how much of it was adopted, it would give, I guess, some sort of an opportunity to discuss on what the future of that should look like. You also have to think about what kind of computational power we'll have by then. You know, it's probably not out of the question to say that 100 years from now we'll probably have quantum computing, and which is literally, I don't know if you guys keep up with that kind of stuff, but it's on the magnitude, on the order of like a million or like a billion times more powerful than our modern computers. We're already calling the computers that we use today classical computers. It's so that's wild to me. And but that's kind of what we're going to be dealing with. Imagine the world of cryptocurrency with quantum computing. I mean, that'd be probably incredible. We might just leave things up to a quantum computer to do things. Who knows?
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. You could even say, we could watch a movie the old-fashioned way on DVD.
Yeah.
How
Exactly.
technology and things have changed.
Yep. So it's hard to say what. Yeah, it's hard to say what things will be like at that point. I mean, who knows? Yeah, go ahead.
Computing's already around, is it not?
Sure is.
Yeah, when there's speculations that they might be able to hack all the wallets, like seed phrases in 5 years or something like that. I heard those rapid speculations the other week.
Yeah, well, the idea of a quantum computer, infiltrating, honestly, quantum computers already here and it's already so powerful, they literally have no idea how to use it.
There's a giant company in Vancouver that's literally all they're doing.
Yep. Google's on it too, there are a bunch of IBM's on it. There's a bunch of people that are like working around the clock just building stuff like this.
I'm pretty sure Buddy that has a huge investment in FTM
Mm-hmm.
network.
Wow.
He has a huge investment in that company in Vancouver, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I mean, this could certainly be something we can talk about too as a formal class. I think that would be a very interesting class. But, yeah, sure, absolutely. But looking into that kind of stuff, it's going to change the game. We don't know how far along humanity will be in 100 years. Let's say, for example, we're on Mars. If we're doing Mars, maybe there's some sort of infrastructure that's keeping a monetary system like Bitcoin alive there too. Who knows? And how do we solve the dilemma of time delay between procurements of a block between Mars and Earth? Because that's a time delay. All this kind of stuff. I mean, honestly, here's the thing that I'm thinking about it is right now everything that we have in terms of immutability and blockchain, that's all localized to Earth. The moment we can start taking time delays and start able to essentially use stuff like wormholes and that kind of nature, and then also having a stability network go through stuff like that. I mean, interstellar monetary systems are going to be crazy, but this is like embryonic stage of that. You know, like we're nowhere near that. So I think, you know, you don't have to worry for now. I think, you know, in terms of mining Bitcoin, we'll mine Bitcoin probably until the day we die. Generationally, I guess they'll figure it out amongst themselves. Okay. So
As far as technology, I mean, that old riddle of double a penny every day for a month with Moore's law. I mean, it doesn't take long. Bitcoin's going to be finished mining in 2040.
yeah. Yeah.
You know, by 2040, how many times does Moore's law in 18 months doubles? How many times is our technology going to double?
Yeah. Right. And that's what, every like 18 months, every 2 years, something like that, right?
Every 18 months. Yeah.
So, and I guess the question would also be is, what are the limits to Moore's law too? Because I think Moore's law was thinking on the silicon chip, right? You know, and if we get down to the atom, you know, you're basically introducing quantum computing. But then how much more? If we're talking that quantum computing is like 1,000,000 to 1,000,000,000 times stronger than the classical computers, does that immediately already take Moore's law out of the equation? And now we're on an exponential, you know, even more exponential growth from that? I don't know. These are all questions that I think about too, and it's just very interesting. But let's not get too sidetracked on quantum, because that's a little bit outside of what we're doing today. Let's kind of refocus, and let's talk about security on Bitcoin network, unless we have one or two questions before I move on.
Yeah, speaking of being 98% minted out, how in the upcoming Bitcoin halving, most likely next year, so how is that going to impact our mining operations in Bitcoin?
Mining rewards will have, and because there's less Bitcoin being put into circulation, that will also increase the price of Bitcoin. I don't see Bitcoin adoption slowing down. Actually, it's ramping up. So I'm expecting to see another bull market at least start in 2024, if not sooner.
I mean, even they're launching, NFTs on Bitcoin now, right? So
Yep.
isn't that going to increase demand for transactions and transaction speed and potential?
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that too.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So let's circle back to that conversation when we get to ordinals. But Bitcoin uses this consensus mechanism of proof of work, right? So it's competing to solve mathematical problems. First miner to solve the puzzle gets the right to add the next block to the blockchain. I want to also mention and we talked about this in mining infrastructure, and having a fast, secure connection to the internet is paramount, okay? Just because your miner solved the puzzle doesn't mean that it will actually add the block to the blockchain. Some other miner can find that puzzle too. And if they have a faster connection to the blockchain than you do, they can earn that block right. Okay? So it's very important that you have a secure connection to the internet. Just want to point that out. But the process ensures a majority of the network agrees on the validity of transactions and prevents double spending, okay, using the same Bitcoin more than once, essentially. And it was impossible for two parties to transact electronically without employing a trusted third party before Bitcoin was, right? We were using banks, right? I use like Zelle from my Chase Bank all the time, right? If I have to go between fiat. But with Bitcoin, there's nothing like that, right? We don't use a bank intermediary. So in order to protect the network from also falsified information, we have new transactions are broadcast in a peer-to-peer fashion across the network by parties to those transactions. And miners look at those transactions and confirm by checking their copy of the ledger that they are not double spends, right? That's what we call the Byzantine generals problem, okay? That's, in a sense, several armies back. This is a historical reference, right? Several armies attacking a fort. The only way to break down that fort was basically if all armies worked together. Okay, here we go. Here's our Memorial Day commemoration analogy, right? Soldiers, right? Trying to come in and attack a fort, attack a fortress. If they work together, they can take it down. And that would then, prevent, in this case, double spending. So it's kind of the analogy that they used. Now, Bitcoin, very secure network, almost impossible to override due to this public key cryptography, and we call this an asymmetrical cryptography. You have a public address and a private address. By using the two, okay, that creates things that are asymmetric, all right, for authorizing transactions. We also have digital signatures that are verifying the authenticity and integrity of those transactions, ensuring that they are tamper-proof. We have hash functions, where each block contains a hash that depends on its data and the previous block's hash, right? So it'll know what was the previous information that came before it, okay? So it will never use falsified information. It will always have the previous hash inside its current block. And that's what we call blockchain, right? That's the chain that connects these blocks. Decentralized network, right? Resilient to attacks or also failures in a single point on the globe, right? Something goes right. Everything in China was banned for a while, and now they went over to the U.S. Now U.S. looks like they want to ban this shit, and now they're going back to China. China opened up mining again. It's all this like crazy nonsense, but at the same time, Bitcoin still runs, right? That's the beautiful thing about it. Also, consensus mechanism, right? Proof of work ensures agreement among network participants, making it difficult for malicious actors to manipulate the blockchain. Here we go. Next page. Come on. Governance. All right, more on governance. So the process for improving the Bitcoin protocol is quasi-political in any sense of the word. Okay, so basically, you have people out there who want to make an improvement, and they have to create a proposal, and they are essentially, think about it like a republic, right? You speak on the forum. People will either heckle you or they'll agree with you. And rather, the process for evolving Bitcoin is one of consensus building, where deliberation and persuasion are going to be critical here, right? You have to make your point good enough for people to want to implement it, right? So it's all part of that, where all participants always retain volition. Okay, important word. So in other words, it's an opt-in system where everyone has the choice to go their own way, and what Bitcoin is up to the people who use it. So importantly, the default culture amongst Bitcoiners is that the protocol does not change unless it absolutely has to. This means that unless the vast majority of participants agree to a change, there will be no change, and those who wish to change are always free to go their own way. Okay? That's essentially what it is. It's a more it is a less technical governance system, I would say. Okay, most of the time when you see a lot of governance systems and protocols like Polkadot or Cardano or any of these sorts of other like proof of stake type of mechanisms, especially, it's very much like cast your vote here with the stake that you have and all this kind of stuff, and it's like you participate in a DAO, right? Like a decentralized autonomous organization that operates on its own autonomously, right? Okay, we don't need to have like this public forum that we're talking about here. Bitcoin, on the other hand, operates in this way, which is a little bit more old school in a sense, and maybe, who knows, is it for better, is it for worse? We're still figuring that out. Maybe sometimes you need to have more of a public forum conversation for certain things, but it's not the most efficient way to pass things through either, right? So I don't know, we'll see. Moving on, let's get to Bitcoin's code upgrade implementation process is formalized through the use of Bitcoin improvement proposals. These are BIPs. They are drafted, peer-reviewed, publicly debated, rigorously tested towards the goal of establishing rough consensus amongst the community. And rough consensus is said to be achieved when most people are satisfied that objections to the proposal are wrong. Okay, makes kind of sense, right? So once rough consensus has been achieved, the next step is to integrate a BIP into the Bitcoin software client implementation known as Bitcoin Core. This step is completed by one of a small number of core developers who have commit access to the code repository, meaning they can upload the code to a specific public platform that the community recognizes. Once the BIP has made it into the Bitcoin Core code repository, the final step is for the network of users, and we are the nodes in this case, to install the new version of the software client. And the final step is critical because it means the end users retain ultimate control over what Bitcoin is. Okay? Any questions about this?
So that means that nodes that don't update the software, they won't be able to mine more Bitcoin, right?
Well, nodes don't mine Bitcoin. Nodes are simply just broadcasting transactions, right? And they operate.
Okay, so then the miners.
Go ahead.
Okay, then let me rephrase the question. But those nodes, they can't participate in the network to validate transactions anymore, right? They don't update the software.
It's not that they won't participate in the network anymore. Bitcoin won't change unless a majority of people attribute the new code. So otherwise, all the nodes participate as normal. There's no change. Only until a majority of the people who are operating nodes commit to that new code will it actually take place, and then everybody will be installing the new Bitcoin Core at the next update. So in a sense, think about it this way, right? Bitcoin Core developers are always putting, let's say like minute little updates to making the blockchain more efficient or whatever. Let's say that, right? So if anybody is going to be updating Bitcoin Core on a massive scale to have brand new code in, first people need to manually install that. And then once most of the majority of people install that, the network then receives that information as a whole, as a version that this is the new thing that everybody needs, and it broadcasts that to everybody else. And so
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Great question. So a little bit more clarity on that, right? Only when a defined threshold of nodes installs the upgrade can it be considered activated. And the barrier to activation for BIPs that make material changes to the Bitcoin protocol is set extremely high. So for example, we'll talk about SegWit in a second, which is BIP 141. It required 95% of the network's miners to signal for the upgrade over a fixed period of 14 days. Importantly, most consequential BIPs introduce backwards compatible changes to the protocol. So backwards compatibility means that any nodes using the new version of the software remain compatible with nodes running the previous version and vice versa. So backwards compatibility provides nodes rather than developers with the final say as to whether a proposal will be implemented, and a backwards compatible update is sometimes called a soft fork. So we've seen several soft forks in many different types of, blockchains out there. And if BIP is not backwards compatible, the only way for it to be introduced is through what's known as a hard fork. And this is where you get things like Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Satoshi's Vision, etc. Those are hard forks of the Bitcoin code. And soft forks, you can consider like there's definitely like upgrades to Ethereum that are being made, and all of these upgrades are kind of considered like soft forks, right? Because we're not delineating from all this other stuff that we're trying to do for Ethereum. We're not creating a new Ethereum coin, but a hard fork of Ethereum was Ethereum Classic, right? So, et cetera, et cetera. Any questions about that or installing these upgrades or soft forks and hard forks? Okay, great. Loving the conversation we're having here today. This is very, very good. Let's talk about SegWit. Okay, SegWit's super important about Bitcoin. It's short for segregated witness. It's a protocol upgrade implemented in certain blockchain networks and most notably in Bitcoin. It was first created for Bitcoin, okay? The idea of the name SegWit was made for Bitcoin, and then it was inspired to use it in other blockchains to put this, okay, to rest. So SegWit aims to address two main issues in the Bitcoin blockchain: transaction malleability and block size limitations. So transaction malleability refers to the ability to modify the unique identifier of a transaction without changing its content, which could potentially cause problems in some advanced use cases. Okay, so in this case, for example, with NFTs, right? We don't want to necessarily just limit the information to just, let's say, one kind of address or something of that sort. The idea of SegWit is to allow the blockchain transaction to have a smaller portion without having the limitations of sort of like serial coding. And when I say series and parallel, series is very much like it has, if you think about series like watching episodes of a show, right? You're watching it in series. But if you're also trying to pass information in series, that's like saying everybody on a bridge, right, going through with their cars, they have to go through one toll booth. Everybody has to go through this one toll booth, right? If we start using things in parallel now, we have several toll booths, right? And now that allows for more traffic to pass through, you know, unaltered, right? So SegWit allows a bit of a parallel information gap, okay? And also, block size limitations was limited to 1 megabyte on Bitcoin, which constrained the number of transactions that could be included in each block. So if we remove some of this information without changing the contents of where it was attributed to, now we've just opened up more room physically for other bits of information to be put into the transaction blocks, thus allowing more throughput, right? More parallel information to be associated with the blockchain. Any questions about that? Let's continue. SegWit introduced a new transaction format by segregating the transaction signature data. Okay, we call that the witness data from the transaction data itself. Okay, so that's the sort of, you can consider like the signature data is the header of the information. Okay, think about it this way, right? Let's say instead of having, if you're looking at a document, right? And you're putting all this information about your transaction data in a document, and at the very, very top, you got in big bold letters your address, right? Now let's just say, okay, let's take, because all that address information is taking up real estate on the page, let's take all those addresses out and then have that put into a folder, right? And the folder, on the front of the folder, we've got the address data and the page that it links to inside that folder, right? So now everything is in this folder. That's the block, right? So all that information, right, all on the pages, now there's less information taken up on each page, and all that information that relates to those pages is basically in like a table of contents, okay? Does that make sense? Any questions about that, or did my analogy totally go over your heads? I guess we're good. Okay, wonderful. Great, excellent. So now separating the witness data, SegWit also resolved the issue of transaction malleability. So with the witness data removed from the transaction ID calculation, any modifications to the witness data would no longer affect the transaction's unique identifier. So SegWit fixed a host of bugs in Bitcoin Core, allowing more transactions per block, and laid the groundwork for layer 2 payment channels like the Lightning Network. And this caused a heated debate in the Bitcoin community, and it actually led to the hard fork. SegWit was a big, important, deciding factor for why people decided to create Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV, etc. It's worth noting that SegWit is specific to the Bitcoin network, but similar concepts and improvements have been implemented in other blockchain networks as well, which then leads us to another upgrade that was actually not too long ago in November 2021. It's called Taproot. And it was a proposed upgrade that aims to enhance privacy, security, and flexibility in transaction scripting. So this was BIP 341. Now, Taproot introduces a new scripting language called TapScript, which offers more complex and expressive smart contract capabilities, right? So this is the first time Bitcoin's ever actually engaged with smart contracts while improving privacy. Now, the main feature of Taproot is the ability to create hidden or smart contract transactions that appear as regular Bitcoin transactions on the blockchain, making them indistinguishable from simple transactions. So, kind of funny. I guess you could say Bitcoin, which is why we call Bitcoin NFTs, actually they're considered Bitcoin ordinals, because the NFTs are more like a mask. They wear a mask that represents a Bitcoin transaction. Okay? They're not necessarily on the blockchain as NFTs themselves. Okay? It's a very, very weird concept to kind of think about, but the way how we're sort of accustomed to NFTs is, right, the NFTs gets printed on the blockchain and it has its own native address and all this kind of stuff. But really, with ordinals, it's more of a transactional data of, hidden inside the transaction is this sort of link to this NFT. Okay? And so, yes, questions? I hear somebody's microphone.
That's also what they call inscriptions, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. They call them inscriptions, ordinal inscriptions. So Taproot achieves this by introducing a concept called Merkleized abstract syntax trees. Okay, very, very scientific way to put it. But we'll say masked. So with masked, multiple possible spending conditions or branches of a transaction can be hashed together into a single Merkle root, and this means that only the spending branch of a transaction needs to be revealed, while the other potential branches remain hidden. And this improves privacy by making complex smart contracts look like regular transactions. Okay, so this is part of the technical side of how we actually make it more privacy focused. And if we remember from talking about mining basics, okay, a Merkle tree is a data structure of the hashes in a block and acts as a summary of all the transactions in the block. And in the Merkle tree, hashes of individual transactions, known as transaction IDs, are paired repeatedly using the algorithm until only one hash identifies the entire tree, and that is the Merkle root. So the Merkle root, again, only now with the upgrade with Taproot, shows transaction output, okay, the spending part of it. You don't necessarily need to see all the other parts that reside in it. So, additionally, Taproot allows for the aggregation of multiple signature data, multi-sigs, mu-sigs, whatever you want to call them. Now we put that into a single signature known as a Schnorr signature. So this reduces the size of transactions and improves efficiency where all parties in a transaction can cooperate to make these complex transactions look like standard person-to-person transactions. And so they do so by combining their public keys to create a new public key and combining their signatures to create a new signature, the Schnorr signature. And Taproot also provides greater flexibility in terms of transaction type, so it allows for more advanced scripting capabilities while maintaining the simplicity of regular transactions, meaning that more complex smart contracts can be executed on the Bitcoin blockchain, opening up possibilities for applications such as decentralized finance, atomic swaps, NFTs, and more. So overall, Taproot is expected to bring significant improvements to the Bitcoin network by enhancing privacy, security, and scalability while enabling more sophisticated and efficient smart contract functionality. Basically the idea is because Bitcoin is like it's primitive, right? It's monolithic in this case. Primitive and monolithic, its information database, you have to conform to Bitcoin, right? So this is our way, Taproot is our way of making it so that all the information, because otherwise if everything was independent, Bitcoin would be congested like crazy, right? So in order for us to make it still efficient on the Bitcoin blockchain, we have to basically create like, everybody comes together with their transaction information, right? This is done automatically through the code. It takes a pool of information, a pool of signatures, makes a multi-signature with one Schnorr signature, right? And that information is then processed through the Bitcoin blockchain as that, right? Remember the folder analogy that I gave? This is basically now that with a bunch of other folders within one giant box. And the box is the Schnorr signature, okay? A banker's box. Everybody ever remember one of those things? A banker's box? So you have all that stuff inside this box, and now that gets through the blockchain with all that information, okay? Any questions about the Taproot functionality? Angela Merkel. Love it. You guys are funny. Okay, so because Ordinals was a direct result of Taproot, let's talk about that. Ordinal inscriptions, which are similar to NFTs. Remember, they're kind of like not NFTs, but it's if it helps to think of them like an NFT, then so be it. We will call them an NFT. But they're digital assets that are inscribed on a Satoshi, the lowest denomination of a Bitcoin, and inscribing on Satoshis is possible thanks to Taproot. Okay, so in mathematics, ordinals is actually a concept that describes the ranking order of objects or sets. And so similarly in Bitcoin, the ordinals protocol has expanded the Bitcoin network by innovating on storing digital artifacts directly on the Bitcoin blockchain. So Bitcoin ordinals allow for the use of block space on each Bitcoin Satoshi to be identifiable inscription of metadata, which can provide added context or record or record as an output. And the output leads to the creation of a digital artifact, which are like NFTs. Okay, so essentially the idea is that you have, these ordinals. It's just code. It's metadata, and that metadata is inscribed into the Bitcoin blockchain as transaction data, which then points to a digital artifact like an NFT. Now, Bitcoin developers have worked to bring non-fungible tokens or NFTs to the number of one blockchain for nearly a decade, beginning in 2014 with Counterparty, the creators of the rare Pepe NFT collection, followed by Stacks in 2017, and now we have ordinals, okay? So, in this case, let's see here, on to the next. The inscription process writes or inscribes the data of the content stored into the witness of the Bitcoin transaction. I'll say that again, right? The inscription process writes or inscribes the data of the content stored into the witness of the Bitcoin transaction. And that was SegWit. Okay? So that was basically, it's on the folder in my analogy that I was talking about. Okay? It's not inside the documentation. It's on the folder. So the first step in the creation of ordinals is users downloading Bitcoin Core and syncing the node to the blockchain. And after the sync is completed, the next step is to create an ordinals wallet and send some Satoshis to the wallet. Now, ordinals can be a complicated process due to the size of the Bitcoin blockchain and the need to use the command line in Windows or terminal in Macs and Linux. And the race is on right now to develop more seamless methods of inscribing on Bitcoin and wallets that make it possible to view the Bitcoin NFT once it is created. Okay, so yeah, we still have that issue of actually storing information like images and stuff like that onto Bitcoin. The ordinals is just metadata. So you get an NFT, that's great, but the NFT doesn't really have an image to it. So you have to we're still in that process of developing what's the most efficient way, because I think they have experimented doing that, but the image was so big, right? Because obviously we only have like 1 megabyte, and actually Taproot extended that to be 4 megabytes. But 4 megabytes is still a small amount of data, right? We're talking like we deal with gigabytes on the regular, in today's world. So having an image like that will take up the entire block and more. Very, very challenging. So we're still trying to figure out how to make sure Bitcoin can still use his information, you know, right. So looking to create a seamless way for collectors to create ordinal inscriptions, Gamma, a Bitcoin NFT marketplace on Stacks, began offering a paid service that allows users to inscribe images and text. Other projects providing this service include Ordinals Bot from the creators of the Satoshibles NFT collection. So with Taproot, Ordinals have posed a challenge to the community. The sheer amount of data on a Bitcoin Ordinal, 4 megabytes, is far more than what was used previously before Taproot opened the floodgates with 1 megabyte. So suddenly the market saw a massive bottleneck on the Bitcoin blockchain. So this functionality will largely be due to the availability of the witness signature data of Bitcoin transactions introduced after Taproot and the soft fork back in 2021. And the block size and space allotted through segregated witnesses updates back in 2017 allowed for a more robust transitions to a maximum limit of 4 megabytes, which was the new Bitcoin block size limit that resulted from the update. Okay, so in this case, any questions about ordinals? No? Cool. Great. So let's start wrapping this up. It's almost at the hour mark. Our conclusion: Bitcoin is leading the charge for the entire cryptocurrency community, as well as the ongoing development of Web3. Bitcoin has gained significant adoption over the years, with increasing acceptance by businesses, institutions, and individuals. Some believe that Bitcoin has the potential to become more widely integrated into mainstream financial systems, potentially serving as a store of value, a medium of exchange, or investment asset alongside traditional currencies and assets. I honestly think that's where Bitcoin shines the most, as a store of value. Were Bitcoin to become the store of value for the world, then that would be the ultimate pinnacle achievement of Bitcoin, in my opinion. Bitcoin, like an investment or technology, carries risks and uncertainties, and factors such as market volatility, technological advancements, regulatory changes, and competition from other cryptos can influence Bitcoin's future. However, future of blockchain strongly relies on the prevalence of Bitcoin, and because of this, Bitcoin is considered one of the safest cryptocurrencies to mine for its longevity and influence. And I recently saw a Twitter post by Lark Davis. If you don't know Lark Davis, he's an influencer, investment type of guru kind of guy. But I actually like what he said here. The biggest risk with Bitcoin is actually not having any. I think there's a lot of future upside to Bitcoin because of its stature. It is the political face for all of cryptocurrency. We can't just ignore Bitcoin and say, oh, Bitcoin's old and all this shit. In my opinion, Bitcoin is the most important one because of its political stance amongst the world. So if we get rid of Bitcoin, then there's nothing left for us here for now. That's why I think Bitcoin is probably the most important one out of all of them. It's most boring, that's for sure. But it's also has the most potential for future longevity too. That's why we added it to our portfolio here at Zeno. All right, so let's let's go around and see if there's any questions or commentary from the class. Thank you for joining me today. This was a very, very good conversation with you guys. I always like the open forum format. Thanks for pitching in on that. I just want to go around and see if there's anything left that anybody has to contribute. Thank you. I appreciate that. I try to use as many forms of analogies in order to explain this very, very, very technical stuff. It's not easy. Was there somebody else who wanted to speak?
I was going to say thank you, Matt Composer, for putting on another informative class. I appreciate it. And like you said, yeah, there is a lot of technical stuff on the back end that most of us don't even really realize how in depth this goes. So, and I know, I asked earlier, why base is so important, but I think, as you said, Bitcoin is basically like the leader of the market, right? Everything tends to follow what Bitcoin is doing. I think even though it's still volatile, it's becoming less volatile than it has in the past, and that becomes and will become more um, as it becomes more mature. It will become less volatile
Mm-hmm.
as well, and we'll see that. You know, I think as regulation comes in, I think we'll start to see a lot more adoption once we reach that point. And I think most of us, at that point, it's really important, as you said, for us to have Bitcoin in our portfolio. If you're not purchasing it yourself, at least from the mining revenue, for us to have that coming in. Um, yeah, I think it would be not a wise investment not to have that in our portfolio.
Yeah, I think
100%.
Yeah, I think people's perception of Bitcoin, as we're, all of us here are in Web3, so we're using crypto on a daily basis, and it's very easy for us to get swallowed up in our own bubble on whatever we're doing, right? But we can't forget that for the rest of the world looks at Web3 as equivalent to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
having Bitcoin is honestly a very big strategic move for the future of the world economy, right? If we're talking about, the potential, I don't see any other cryptocurrency being on par with Bitcoin when it comes to having a world reserve. This is the one. If there's going to be a world reserve, it's going to be Bitcoin. It's not going to be Ethereum. It's not going to be Phantom. It's not going to be Polkadot. It's not going to be any of these other cryptocurrencies. It's going to be Bitcoin. And that's because Bitcoin is the only one that we've actually attributed to being an actual commodity, the only digital commodity in its space. Okay? Super, super important to remember that. So, yes, Bitcoin is old. It's like, you know, it's coughing up like freaking, I don't know. It doesn't move as fast as any of these other people, but it's a juggernaut. It is the house that we live in, for all of us to enjoy its splendors. Yeah. Let's see here. Mask. Yeah, you can absolutely DM me if you want to have any other questions or something like that. Sure, no problem, man. Um, yeah. Any other thoughts or comments as we're wrapping this space up? You're welcome. You're welcome. Next week we'll talk about Cadena in depth, and similar thing. Last week we talked about Nervos. Today we talked about Bitcoin. So next week we'll talk about Cadena, and then following that we'll talk about Litecoin, and maybe Doge on the same token, but because they're very similar in the way they operate. But I will absolutely go through all these other coins, and if there's other stuff, maybe we can talk about quantum computing afterwards. That might be a really fun one to relate here.
Did you see that Doge is launching ERC20 tokens now?
No, I did not. Where'd you get that info?
I just saw a post by Coin Bureau, who I follow on Twitter.
Oh yeah,
He's a pretty big.
absolutely.
Yeah, he just put. Yeah, they're now launching DRC20 tokens now on the Doge
DRC20. Wow.
I also heard that they got some documentary movie coming out. Did you hear something about that?
Who's making it? Do you know?
Can't remember. I saw something on Twitter. I should have screenshotted it. But yeah.
And
That's
it
what I
and,
just
and this is about Bitcoin?
know about Doge.
Oh, Doge. That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, that's great. If we can get more publicity for this stuff, I mean, that's great. That's great for the space. I'm really happy to see.
It bodes well too if we have Doge miners online and there's a lot of transactions going on. That's just more revenue.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
That's fun. Oh,
Yes. Yeah, here at Xeno Mining, we know where it's at. That's why we do this stuff. So also, guys, today's Memorial Day. Don't forget to, commemorate and say thank you to those who are in service. And for those of you who are here today in my class that are veterans, thank you for your service. And, enjoy your day. Have a blessed time with your family. Go out. I don't know if anybody went hiking this weekend or anything of that sort, but this is your day, and I am so happy to be a part of Dogface and Xeno. This is just a privilege to be amongst you guys. So thank you. Other than that, I will.
hey, Matt Composer, I'm sending you a link.
Thank you.
Listen,
I will.
It's a new piece we're working on. You might recognize this track.
Awesome.
Send it to you in your private. You can
I will do it. Thank you so much. Yeah, and again, if anybody has any other questions they want to ask me, you're more than welcome to open up a chat between me and you. That is totally fine. Message me. I won't DM. You message me. All right, folks. I'll call it over here. And thanks again for this awesome time with you folks. It's a pleasure. See you next week.